The lantern was supposed to be invincible. That was the word Ruby had used when she bought it. Invincible. Standing in the outdoor equipment store on Pike Street, with the kind of focused urgency of someone purchasing a piece of survival gear rather than a camping accessory. The salesman, a broad-shouldered kid with a complexion that suggested he genuinely spent weekends outdoors, rather than pretending to, had held the lantern up like a chalice and recited its virtues. Titanium-reinforced casing, weatherproof to IPX8, 360-degree beam diffusion, 22 hours of continuous runtime on a single charge. Ruby had nodded at each feature like a patient signing consent forms before surgery, absorbing every syllable as collateral against her own anxiety. She had swiped her card without asking the price. That was 4 days ago. Now the lantern was blinking. If you've ever loved someone in the quiet and didn't know how to say it, or if you just root for love that's real, hit like and subscribe. This story is for you. Not dramatically. Not in the conclusive, merciful way of a light that simply goes out and commits to darkness. It blinked the way an old television used to when you hit it on the side. A flickering hesitation, a visual stutter that suggested the machinery was thinking about failing rather than actually failing, which was somehow worse. Each blink lasted less than half a second. Each blink made Ruby's chest tighten by approximately the same fraction. She was sitting on a folded tarp outside the tent, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the lantern with the focused expression of a bomb disposal technician. Around her, the Cascade Range was doing what it did every evening in late September, collapsing into itself. The pines were reducing to silhouettes. The ridgeline was dissolving into the overcast sky above it like watercolor bleeding past its lines. The light, what remained of it, was the color of old pewter and going fast. "You're staring at it like that's going to help," said Florence June Vance from somewhere behind her. Ruby did not turn around. "I'm monitoring it." That's a more dignified word for the same thing. June emerged from around the side of the tent, carrying 2 enamel mugs, both exhaling thin curls of steam into the cooling air. She was wearing a faded olive fleece that had been washed so many times it no longer had a nap, just a kind of compressed resolve. Her dark hair was pulled back with the same weathered elastic she'd been using since they left the trailhead that morning. Ruby had noticed it because it was the color of pine bark, and because she had a habit of noticing things about June that she then pretended not to have noticed. June moved through the campsite the way she moved through everything, without hesitation, without adjustment, like someone who had made their peace with the physical world a long time ago and simply inhabited it now. She handed Ruby one of the mugs. Their fingers did not touch during the handoff. Ruby registered this with the same involuntary precision with which she registered everything about June, filed it away in the growing archive she was not consciously aware she was keeping. "Earl Grey," June said, settling onto the log beside her, not next to her. There was a respectful distance of maybe 14 inches between them, the kind of distance that says, "I am here," without saying, "I am yours," which was the exact topography of every inch of space between them that Ruby could remember. "I know you said you wanted the decaf. I lied about the decaf. I need the caffeine. You're already tense enough to vibrate." "I'm focused," Ruby said. June looked at her over the rim of her mug. The look lasted exactly long enough to communicate skepticism without tipping into cruelty. "Right," she said simply, and looked away. The lantern blinked again. Ruby made a sound in the back of her throat. Not quite a word, not quite a groan. Something in the register between them that people make when something they feared is beginning to manifest. She set her mug down on the flat of the tarp, carefully, the way people set things down when their hands are not entirely steady, and she pressed her palms against her kneecaps and breathed. June watched her do this, without comment. That was one of the things about June. She did not narrate other people's distress back to them. She did not say, "Are you okay?" when it was obvious you were not. She did not offer solutions before she'd been asked for them. She simply watched, and the watching was neither cold nor intrusive. It was the kind of attention that a person gives to a landscape they respect, patient and unblinking and prepared for anything. "It's going to go out," Ruby said. "Maybe." That's not the reassuring response I needed. "I know." June took a slow drink of her tea. "The reassuring response would be to lie to you, and you're too smart for that to help." Ruby looked at her sidelong. June was looking at the tree line, which had committed fully to darkness now, the individual pines having merged into a single continuous wall of black. The sky above them was the color of a bruise, not the fresh, vivid kind, but the faded, yellowish kind that comes toward the end of healing, which somehow suggested worse weather was stored above it, waiting. "There's no moon tonight," Ruby said. It was not a complaint exactly. It was more like stating a medical diagnosis, something clinical and definitive that changed what came next. "The forecast said possible cloud cover," June said. Possible turned into actual. "Possible cloud cover," Ruby repeated. That's a phrase that sounds like a minor inconvenience. It sounds like the kind of thing that ruins a picnic. It's not going to ruin anything. It's going to be very, very dark, June. June turned to look at her then. Not the sidelong glance from before, but a full, frontal look, the kind that required Ruby to meet it or visibly avoid it. Ruby met it because she had learned that avoiding June's direct attention required more energy than it saved. "I know," June said, and her voice had shifted registers slightly, dropped half a degree from the practical into something that was not quite tender, but was adjacent to it. "That's why I'm here." Ruby looked at her for a moment too long. Then she looked back at the lantern. It blinked again. A longer blink this time. 3/4 of a second, maybe. "I shouldn't be this bad at this," Ruby said quietly. The shift in her tone was not dramatic. She did not go from composed to crumbling. She went from performing composure to simply not performing it, which looked, from the outside, almost the same. "I study things that are 50,000 light years away. I have stared at photographs of voids, actual voids, interstellar regions where there is literally nothing, not even light, and found them beautiful. I publish papers about dark matter. I go to conferences about the nature of darkness as a cosmological principle." She paused. "And I cannot," she said, "be in a dark room without wanting to crawl out of my own body." The forest was very quiet, not silent. The cascades were never silent. There were always sounds operating at frequencies that registered as silence until you listened for them. The drip of water from needles, the distant percussion of something small moving through undergrowth, the low tonal hum of wind pressure against the tree line. But it was quiet in the way that mattered, which was the way of absence. No voices, no mechanical sounds, no ambient electrical hum, no streetlights reflected in clouds. The sounds that remained were the sounds of a world that had never been electric, and they were, in their way, more frightening than silence would have been, because they were evidence of how far she was from anything engineered by humans. "The irony," June said, "is one of the things I like most about you." Ruby blinked, not at the lantern, at the comment. It had appeared without warning, slipped into the quiet the way June sometimes said things, without preamble or softening, as though she had simply decided to say them, and the decision was its own explanation. "What irony," Ruby said, "that you spend your whole professional life getting other people comfortable with the idea that the universe is incomprehensibly vast and dark, and mostly empty." June looked at her again, something shifting in her expression that Ruby could not parse in the failing light. "And then you are personally terrified of the dark. I know the irony. I live inside it. I know you do." A pause. "I'm not making fun of you. I know that too." Another pause, longer. The kind of pause that collects things in it. "You were 7, June said. It was not a question. Ruby's jaw tightened. "I told you that a long time ago." "You told me once, At a conference in Denver after 3 glasses of wine. You probably assumed I'd forgotten. I assumed you were being polite by not bringing it up again. I was, June said. Until now. She turned back toward the tree line. You don't have to talk about it. I'm not bringing it up to dig around in it. I'm bringing it up because it matters to me that the reason is real. Not that it wouldn't matter if it were irrational. Fear is fear. But knowing it's rooted in something real makes me take it more seriously. Not less. Ruby stared at the side of June's face. This was something June did, periodically. Said something that restructured the space around them without appearing to notice that she'd done it. Ruby had a theory that June was, in fact, aware of exactly what she was doing, and that the appearance of casualness was not unconscious, but was rather a form of grace, giving the other person room to receive a difficult thing without the pressure of being watched while receiving it. The basement, Ruby said finally. The word had a particular flat weight to it, the way words do when you have said them many times inside your own head, and they have been compressed by repetition into something dense. My parents were at a party. The babysitter was 17, and I was, as you said, 7. And I wanted to know what was in the basement, and she said I shouldn't go down there alone, but I went anyway. She picked up her mug again, held it without drinking. The door closed behind me. The light pole was a string that I couldn't find in the dark. I was down there for 4 hours before anyone noticed. June did not say, I'm sorry, and she did not say, that's awful. She said nothing, which was the correct response, and she let the story sit in the air between them in its full weight without trying to reduce it. After a moment, she leaned forward and put her elbows on her knees and looked at the ground between her feet. And Ruby noticed that her hands, wrapped around her own mug, were holding it slightly tighter than before. 4 hours, June said eventually, very quietly. It felt like 4 years. I know. You can't know that. No, June agreed. You're right, wrong word. I believe it. The difference between I know and I believe was considerable, and June's willingness to correct herself in the direction of precision rather than comfort was another thing Ruby had categorized in her private archive, filed under the heading of Things About June that make it difficult to think about other people. The lantern blinked again. This time the gap of darkness lasted almost a full second. Ruby set down her mug and stood up. She stood with her arms crossed, her chin tilted up at an angle that was meant to communicate resolve, and probably communicated something closer to defensiveness. And she looked at the sky. There were no stars. This was unusual, even under cloud cover. Usually the clouds broke somewhere, through a gap, and you could find at least 1 or 2 points of cold light in the breaks. Tonight there was nothing. The sky was total, a single unbroken gray-black surface, like the inside of a closed box. What time does it get fully dark? She asked. It's already fully dark, June said. Ruby looked back down. She looked at the lantern. The lantern looked back at her with its flickering eye, and she thought, 22 hours of continuous runtime, and she calculated in her head. They had turned it on at 5:30. It was now approximately 8:45, which meant 3 hours and 15 minutes of runtime, which meant the lantern should have 19 hours of power remaining, which meant something was wrong with either her calculation or the lantern. And she found herself hoping, in a way that said something uncomfortable about her state of mind, that the problem was with her calculation. June, she said. I see it, June said. She had set down her mug and was already on her feet, crossing to the lantern with that unhurried efficiency of hers, crouching beside it. She examined it with a small pocket torch that she produced from somewhere in her fleece. Ruby had never been able to identify where June kept things. She seemed to have an inexhaustible supply of exactly the right object at exactly the right moment. And she turned the lantern over once, checked the charging port, tapped the power indicator. Moisture got into the housing, June said. Not a lot. but enough to mess with the charge controller. Can you fix it? June looked up at her. In the torchlight, her face was serious and calm in the way that bad news was serious and calm when delivered by someone who respected you. Not out here. Ruby absorbed this. She absorbed it the way she had learned to absorb difficult data, methodically, without immediate reaction, running it through the relevant frameworks before arriving at a conclusion. The relevant framework here was, I am in a forest in the Cascades, with no moon, no stars, total cloud cover, and my primary light source is failing. The conclusion the framework produced was, this is going to be bad. We have the headlamps, June said, standing. My torch. The camp stove emits enough light to be useful at close range. We're not in the dark. We're in everything except the dark, Ruby said. We're in the almost dark, which is the worst version. Why? Because the almost dark still has enough light to see that the light is running out. She pressed her hands over her face, briefly, then dropped them. In full dark, your brain sort of gives up and adjusts. In almost dark, it keeps trying. It keeps hoping the light will come back. It's the hope that's... She stopped. June was looking at her with an expression that Ruby would not have been able to name in a lineup. It was not pity. It was not the particular kind of care that people extend toward someone who is being unreasonable that has a slightly elevated quality, that subtle upward tilt of patience that is not quite condescension. It was something more level than those, something that looked, if she was being honest with herself in the way she was usually too careful to be, a great deal like recognition. Okay, June said simply. Let's get everything sorted before the lantern goes out completely. That way we're not doing it in the dark. They worked efficiently in the remaining light, which had the quality of a loan being called in. Provisional, time-limited, demanding urgency. June moved through the campsite with her torchlight and organized. The headlamps went by the tent entrance, arranged so they could be found without fumbling. The camp stove was positioned close to the tent door, so its low blue light could be seen from inside. 2 additional battery packs were laid out on the sleeping roll nearest the entrance, along with June's secondary torch and a box of waterproof matches that neither of them discussed the purpose of. Ruby helped where she could. She unrolled the sleeping bags and zipped them open along the right sides, so they could be combined into a single wide bag if temperatures dropped, which was procedure for their kind of expedition. She knew that. It was practical, and she was a practical person generally. She organized their food bag and checked the bear canister. She found her notebook and put it in the front pocket of her pack with its accompanying pen, because she always wrote in her notebook when she needed to feel like she was doing something useful with her brain, and she suspected she was going to need that option tonight. All the while, the lantern blinked. Its intervals between blinks were shortening, which was worse, because it was easier to measure the rate of decline. June unzipped the tent and gestured for her to go in. Ruby looked at the tent. The tent was, in its own way, an affront. She had selected it for its interior volume, 6.2 square meters, which was generous by any camping standard. But it was still a tent, still a fabric envelope, still a space defined by its enclosure. An enclosure was not something Ruby's nervous system associated with safety, regardless of what her rational mind tried to tell it. I'll be right behind you, June said. Ruby ducked inside. The tent smelled like nylon and pine, and something faintly chemical from the seam sealer, and it was darker inside than out, even with the lantern flickering nearby. And she did the thing her therapist had taught her. She sat cross-legged in the center, placed her hands palm up on her knees, and breathed in a 5-count rhythm. She named 5 things she could feel: the texture of the sleeping bag beneath her, the cool air from the vents, her own heartbeat, the solid ground under the tent floor, the fabric of her jacket between her fingers where she'd fisted her hand without noticing. She named 4 things she could hear. She named 3 things she could smell. It helped approximately 40%. June came in behind her, zipping the tent closed with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She positioned the two headlamps between them, face up, and switched one to its lowest setting, casting a dim ambient glow that made the tent feel less like a sealed container and more like a small room. Then she sat down across from Ruby, folded her long legs into a comfortable configuration, and opened her own notebook. They sat in companionable near silence for perhaps 20 minutes. The camp stove's pilot light was visible through the mesh window panel at the base of the tent door, a blue thread of flame. The headlamp between them cast a circle of low gold that reached both of them and stopped at the tent walls. Outside, the lantern continued its declining blink sequence, now almost rhythmic in its irregularity. Then it went out. It didn't go out dramatically. No final flare, no extended fade. It simply stopped blinking, and the stopping was the end of it. And the world outside the tent, which had been almost dark, became fully dark in the way that a door closing is fully closed, without ambiguity, without partial states. Ruby heard herself make a sound. She was not aware she was going to make it until she made it. A short, involuntary intake of breath that had a quality of compression to it, like something being pressed. Her hand went to the headlamp between them before she was conscious of reaching for it, and she turned it to its next setting, the medium one, and the circle of light expanded, and she sat very still and monitored herself the way she monitored the lantern, looking for the interval between responses, calculating the rate of decline. "Hey," June said. Her voice was steady in the new quality of darkness, unchanged, which was itself steadying. "It's okay." "I know it's okay," Ruby said. Her voice did not sound like her voice. It sounded like her voice put through a processor that had thinned it slightly, stripped some of its resonance. "I know it's okay. My nervous system is currently disputing that assessment." "What does your nervous system say?" "Several things. Most of them involve the word trapped." "You're not trapped." "I know. The zipper is right there." "I know that too. You could be outside in 2 seconds." "The outside," Ruby said with great care, "is also dark." June went quiet. She did the thing she did, which was not fill the silence with reassurance, not offer the procedural comfort of someone working through a checklist, but simply be quiet in the particular way that made quiet feel inhabited rather than empty. Ruby focused on the headlamp. She focused on the circle of its light. She measured its diameter against the width of her outstretched arm and found that it covered approximately the same territory. Not a vast light, but a real one. A defined one. A light with edges that held. "Can I tell you something?" Ruby said. "That I've never told anyone." "Yes," June said immediately, without modification, without the prefix of course, or definitely, that would have made it sound ceremonial. Just yes, the way you say it when you mean it. "It's not the dark itself," Ruby said. "That's what everyone assumes, that it's a fear of darkness as a physical state. Photons, absence of photons. But that's not..." She stopped, started again. "When I'm in the dark, the thing that happens is that I stop being able to locate myself. In space, I know I'm somewhere. I know I have a body, and that the body is in a specific location. But in the dark, I cannot feel that location. I cannot feel the edges of myself against the world. It's like..." She searched for the analogy, which was the kind of searching she did quickly and well, because language was one of the tools she trusted. "You know the way an astronaut in open space, without a tether, without visual reference points, experiences spatial disorientation. No up, no down, no sense of velocity or direction." "I know the phenomenon," June said quietly. "It's that, but not in my body, in my sense of myself. In the dark, I lose my spatial relationship to everything around me, and that makes me lose. I lose myself. I can't feel where I end and the dark begins." She exhaled, which is the most ironic possible manifestation of nyctophobia for a woman who has spent 20 years studying cosmic voids. The headlamp hummed its thin hum. Outside, a gust moved through the pines, a long, low, rushing sound, and then settled. "The thing about cosmic voids," June said carefully, "is that they're not actually empty." Ruby looked up at her. In the medium light, June's face was half in gold and half in shadow, and the combination made her look not different from how she usually looked, but like a more legible version of herself, the way low light sometimes simplifies a face to its essential architecture. Her eyes were dark and very still, and they were looking at Ruby with the quality of attention that Ruby had spent years being simultaneously drawn to and frightened of, because it was the kind of attention that saw rather than observed. "Cosmic voids contain galaxies," June said. "Just fewer. And they're threaded with dark matter we can't see. They're not empty. They're just less full than other places." A pause. "I always thought that was one of the more interesting things you talked about at the Denver conference, before the wine. You were listening to my talk? You were speaking. Of course I was listening." Ruby felt something shift in her chest, in the place just below the sternum where she sometimes located the feeling of being moved by something. Not a sharp feeling, but a slow, tidal one, like a heavy thing that had been very gradually displacing itself toward a new position. "June," she said. "Yeah. What are you afraid of?" The silence that followed was not June's usual productive silence, the kind she used as a tool. This one had a different texture, something more like the moment before an answer when the answer cost something. "Height," June said, eventually. "Which is embarrassing for a wilderness guide." "That's not what you're actually afraid of," Ruby said. Another silence. Longer this time. Outside, the wind moved through the pines again, and this time it didn't quite settle. It descended from a rush to a continuous low pressure, a sound like the world breathing out. "No," June agreed. "It's not." She didn't say what it was. And Ruby, who was herself an expert in the architecture of what is not said, did not press her. She filed it instead, in the archive, under a new heading that she hadn't needed before. "Things June is afraid of that she will tell me when she's ready." The tent walls shifted inward slightly with the pressure of the wind, a slow billowing and settling, and Ruby watched this with the concentrated focus of someone who is using all available stimuli as anchors to the present moment. The fabric moved and resettled, moved and resettled. Outside, the wind was picking up, not dramatically, but steadily, with the sense of a sustained system rather than a passing gust. Ruby could hear the pine tops moving in long, slow arcs, the particular sound of a forest under sustained lateral pressure. And then the headlamp between them blinked. It was one blink, brief, and the light came back immediately. A power fluctuation, a vibration in the connection, nothing serious. But it was enough. It was enough to make Ruby's entire nervous system, which had been managing itself on a very narrow set of tolerances, tip past the boundary it had been maintaining. She did not scream. That was important to her afterward, that she had not screamed. What she did was grab the headlamp with both hands and press it to her sternum, which she recognized, even in the moment, as irrational. The lamp was fine. She was not helping by holding it. The lamp did not need to be held. But the act of holding something that made light, of having the light physically inside the grip of her hands, reduced the processing cost of breathing by a significant fraction. "Ruby." June's voice, even and close. "Look at me." Ruby looked at her. "I've got you," June said. It was a simple sentence. It was not a sophisticated sentence. It was the kind of sentence that would read, in a transcript, as ordinary, as generic, as the sort of thing anyone says in a crisis situation. But it was said by June, in June's particular voice, with June's particular quality of saying things she meant to the exact degree she said them, and not 1 degree further or less. And Ruby's body, which was not interested in nuance right now, but was very interested in signals it could trust, received it like a clear signal in a field of interference. "Okay," Ruby said. Her voice was thinner now. She was past the register of performance. "I know. I know I'm being—" "You're not being anything," June said. "You're having a fear response to a situation that activates a deep-seated trauma. You're doing it in a coherent and non-destructive way. You're doing fine. I don't feel fine. I know." June moved then. She moved across the 14 inches of considered distance between them on the sleeping bag, and she sat beside Ruby, and she put one arm around Ruby's shoulders, and the arm was— Ruby would think about this later, in the days after they came home, sitting in her apartment with her tea going cold and her laptop open to a paper she wasn't writing. The arm was both definitive and gentle, the way a guardrail is both definitive and gentle. It said, "Here is where the drop is, and here is where it is not," without pretending either was anything other than what it was. Ruby leaned into her. She did not decide to do this. Her body made the decision, and her decision-making apparatus, occupied elsewhere, was informed of it after the fact. She leaned into June, and her head found the space between June's jaw and shoulder that was, it turned out, proportioned exactly for her head, and she pressed her face into the soft, worn fabric of the fleece, and she could smell cedar, cold air, something faintly resinous, something that was just June, a smell she had been aware of at the margins of awareness for years, and was now breathing in from close enough to identify all its components. And she closed her eyes. "Still here," June said quietly, to no one in particular. "I know," Ruby said. Her voice was muffled by the fleece. "I know you are." June's arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. Not dramatically, not in the way of someone making a statement. In the way of someone making a correction, adjusting their hold to be more secure, the way you'd adjust a grip when you felt something starting to slip. Ruby felt the adjustment and something in her chest, the tight knot of panic that had been building since the lantern started blinking, released a degree. Not fully. 1 degree. The wind pressed against the tent. The camp stove's pilot light was still visible through the mesh panel, its blue thread of flame improbably steady. The headlamp that Ruby still held in her hands against her sternum continued its solid and unblinking light. "June?" Ruby said. "Yeah? Can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything." She felt June's voice in her chest when she said it, because she was close enough that speech was no longer just sound, but also vibration, and she registered this, cataloged it, filed it, because she was Ruby, and she cataloged everything, even at her most frightened, even at the moments when the catalog was all that stood between her and the feeling of being untethered. "When you brought me here," Ruby said. Her voice was steadier now, the panic having shifted from acute to managed, which was not good but was better. "When you agreed to this, the field expedition, the camping, all of it, did you know it was going to be like this? That I was going to—" She gestured vaguely at the space around them, the dark tent, her own face pressed into the shoulder of her guide. "That you were going to need help," June said carefully. "That I was going to need—" Ruby searched for the right word and couldn't find one that didn't expose more than she wanted to expose, so she settled for the most accurate one available. "This." June was quiet for a moment. Outside, the pine tops bent in the sustained wind. The tent walls billowed and settled. The blue thread of stove flame held. "I knew something like this was possible," June said. "You told me about the basement. I'm not an idiot." A pause. "But no. I didn't plan for it. I didn't come out here hoping for a reason to—" She stopped. She was not, Ruby noticed with some precision, finishing her sentences. June finished sentences. That was one of her primary characteristics as a speaker. She began things and completed them, She did not leave structural elements hanging. The fact that she was not completing things now was a piece of data that Ruby filed under the new heading. "I'm glad you're here," Ruby said. It was a neutral statement. It was meant to be neutral. It was the kind of statement that could be received as simple gratitude and no more. June's arm tightened again. "One more degree." "Me too," June said. They sat like that, as the wind pressed and the flame held, and the darkness outside continued its absolute governance of everything beyond the tent's small perimeter of light. Ruby was still afraid. This was important. She was still afraid. She had not been rescued from fear. She had not been cured of it, or argued out of it, or distracted sufficiently past it. She was afraid, and she was also held. And she was learning, at the age of 34, that those two things could coexist in the same body at the same time without either canceling the other. She thought about cosmic voids. She thought about the way she taught them in introductory lectures. Her first slide always the same. A deep field photograph of a region that appeared, to the naked eye, empty. A space between galaxy clusters where there was simply nothing visible, a gap in the luminous fabric of the universe. And then the second slide. The same region, imaged in infrared and radio waves, threaded with filaments of dark matter, scattered with the reddish pinprick signatures of distant, isolated galaxies. "Not empty," she always said. "Just different from other places. The same rules apply. Gravity still works. Light still travels. Matter is just arranged more quietly here." She had never made the personal application of this metaphor. It seemed at this moment extremely obvious. "What does it feel like?" she asked quietly, not lifting her head. "Being the person who's—" She considered the syntax carefully. "Being the person on your side of this." A very long pause. Outside, the wind made a particular sound as it moved through a gap in the tree line. A single, sustained note, almost musical. "Heavy," June said finally. The word surprised both of them, Ruby thought. It had a quality of having escaped, of having gotten out from under a more controlled response. In a good way, if that makes sense. The way something valuable is heavy. Ruby pressed her face more firmly into the fleece. Her fingers, which still held the headlamp, relaxed fractionally. "It makes sense," she said. Another long quiet. The blue flame, the wind, the walls of the tent pressing inward and releasing, like breathing. Ruby's own breathing, which had been shallow and rapid since the lantern went out, was slowing, not to its ordinary pace, not yet, but in the direction of it, like a temperature returning to ambient after a spike. "Ruby," June said. "Yeah. You study the dark matter between things." "I do. The stuff that connects everything that's visible even though you can't see it." "That's—" Ruby paused. "That's a more poetic version of the technical description, but essentially, yes." "Maybe," June said slowly, and Ruby could hear her choosing words in real time, the deliberate quality of someone doing something careful with language. "The way you can study something you're afraid of, the way you can love something that terrifies you, is interesting to me. You do that. You've been doing it your whole career. You look at the dark and you find the structure in it." Ruby was quiet. She was quiet for a long time, and June let her be quiet, and the space between words was not uncomfortable, but was the kind of heavy quietness that comes when someone has said something true, and the truth of it needs room. "I never thought about it that way," Ruby said finally. "I know you didn't. You're too close to it. And you're not." "No," June said. "I'm—" Another pause. Another incomplete sentence. "I see you from a distance you don't have." The implications of this were numerous, and Ruby was aware of most of them, and she chose, with deliberate care, to not follow any of them to their conclusions. Not tonight. Tonight she was in a tent in the Cascades, with no moon and no stars, and a wind that had settled into something sustained and steady. And she was afraid, and she was held, and she was allowing herself to be both of those things at once. "June," she said. "Yeah. I'm sorry." "What for?" She stopped. She thought. She started again. "For being this. For needing this. You're a professional wilderness guide. This isn't—" "Stop," June said. Her voice had dropped register, not harshly. It was not a rebuke, but it had the quality of a correction, the kind given to something that is heading in the wrong direction before it gets there. "If you say you're sorry for needing me, I will say something I've been not saying for approximately 3 years, and this is not the right night for that." Ruby went very still. She felt very still in the way that stillness is not absence of movement, but presence of concentrated attention. She was aware of the exact pressure of June's arm around her shoulders. She was aware of the warmth of June's body, the temperature differential between the air in the tent and the surface of June's arm. She was aware of her own heartbeat, and, because they were close enough, of the one that wasn't hers. 3 years, Ruby said. The words came out flat and careful, like a measurement. "Give or take," June said. Her voice was even. "That's—" Ruby stopped. She did the math, which she didn't need to do but did anyway, because she did mathematics as a reflex. 3 years ago was the Denver conference, the one with the wine. The one where she had told June about the basement, in the low light of the hotel bar with the jazz recording cycling on the sound system, leaning across a small table and saying the things she had never said before. The conference where she had first noticed, consciously, undeniably, past the point of being able to attribute it to anything else, the way June listened. "Oh," she said. "Yeah," June said. The wind moved through the pines. The stove flame held. The tent walls breathed. Ruby's heart, which had been doing something complicated and not entirely cardiac, did something even more complicated and even less cardiac. "June," she said. "Ruby," June said. There was something in her voice that was almost, not quite, but almost amused in the way people are when the situation has resolved into something both serious and slightly absurd, which was the way the most real things often resolved. "I'm still scared," Ruby said. "I know. I'm going to be scared for most of the night, probably." "Probably," June agreed. "I am going to need—" Ruby stopped. She took a breath. She started again. "I am going to need this, possibly the entire night. I want you to know that before you—" "Ruby," June said, and her arm tightened again. A 3rd degree. And this time it was not an adjustment. It was a statement. It was June making a statement in the language she used best, which was the language of physical, definitive, unceremonious presence. "I know. I don't want you to feel—" "I don't feel anything I don't want to feel," June said. "You should know that about me by now." Ruby thought about all the things she knew about June. That she took her coffee with no sugar, but 3 times the usual quantity. That she named the trails she'd guided more than 50 times. That she carried a paperback of Pablo Neruda in Spanish in the top pocket of her pack. The same copy, its spine repaired twice with electrical tape. That she spoke carefully and felt, Ruby suspected, enormously. She thought about what June had just said, 3 years, give or take. And she thought about the distance of 3 years and the shape of a distance that is measured in time, but felt in something else entirely. 3 years is a long time, Ruby said. "It's not so long," June said quietly, "when you're not sure the thing you're hoping for is possible." "And now?" A long pause, the longest pause of the night. "Now," June said carefully, "you're in my arms, in a tent, in the dark, in the mountains. And you're scared. And you need me here. And I'm going to be here." Another pause. "And that's—" For right now, that's a lot. For right now, Ruby repeated. For right now, June confirmed. And then, so quietly it was almost underneath the sound of the wind. Ask me again when the sun comes up. Ruby closed her eyes. She was still afraid. She was still inside the dark, the complete dark. The dark without stars or moon or lantern or any photon source that was not the small headlamp in her own hands. But she was also... She reached for the word and found it, slightly to her own surprise. She was also here. She was specifically, concretely, undeniably here, in this tent, in this sleeping bag, in the arms of this particular person who smelled like cedar and cold air, and the particular combination of those things that was just June, who had been not saying something for 3 years, and had chosen tonight to almost say it, who was afraid of height, but not of heights, who had read all of Ruby's published work. Ruby knew this suddenly with a certainty that required no confirmation, knew it the way you know a thing you have always known but not yet articulated. Who had come into this forest not because it was a job, but because it was Ruby. She pressed her face into the fleece. She felt June's heartbeat, steady and somewhat faster than a person's heartbeat should be when they are at rest, when they are calm, when they are simply being a professional wilderness guide providing support to a frightened client in the dark. She felt her own heartbeat, doing something similar. June, she said. Yeah. Thank you. Don't thank me for this, June said. Her voice was very quiet. I'm here because I want to be here. That's different from doing you a favor. Ruby absorbed this. She absorbed it carefully, the way she absorbed data that had the potential to change her entire interpretive framework. Because it did. It changed things. It was changing things right now. She could feel things changing the way you can feel a gear shift in a vehicle even before you hear the change in engine tone. The wind continued. The flame continued. The dark outside the tent continued. But inside the tent, the light held.